Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to learn about the functional anatomy of posterior pituitary gland. To know about the posterior pituitary gland, we are going to the first slide. In this slide, we can see the structure of pituitary gland, which is attached with the hypothalamus. This is the hypothalamus. This is the pituitary stalk, and this is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is having two lobes. This is the anterior pituitary gland, and this is the posterior pituitary gland. In the previous lecture, we have learned about the anterior pituitary gland, and today we are going to learn about the anterior pituitary gland. As we know that the posterior pituitary gland is called neurohypophysis. So it means that posterior pituitary gland is the part of brain and anterior pituitary gland is the part of endocrine system. So the posterior pituitary gland do not contain any endocrine cell. Actually, the posterior pituitary gland is also supervised by the hypothalamus. In the hypothalamus, we know that there are four major types of nuclei. The two nuclei which supervise or which control the function of the posterior pituitary gland are shown in the figure, shown in the diagram. In this diagram, we can see two nuclei inside the hypothalamus. This nucleus represents the paraventricular nucleus, and this nucleus represents the supraoptic nucleus. This is called paraventricular nucleus because this is parallel with the third ventricle. This is adjacent with the third ventricle, and this is called supraoptic nucleus because this nucleus is above the optic chiasma. Over here there is optic chiasma, that is why this is called supraoptic nucleus. So as we know that the nucleus is the collection of cell bodies, so both of these nuclei represent the collection of cell bodies. The paraventricular nucleus contains the cell bodies which are responsible for the synthesis of oxytocin, while the supraoptic nucleus contains the cell bodies which are responsible for the synthesis of vasopressin, or also called antidiuretic hormone. So the oxytocin is transferred from the paraventricular nucleus to the posterior pituitary gland with the help of axons. This is the collection of axons which form a tract. The collection of axons is called tract. So over here, this tract is called paraventricular hypophyseal tract, while the tract which transfer the antidiuretic hormone from the supraoptic nucleus to the posterior pituitary gland, this tract is called supraoptic hypophyseal tract, and both of these tracts are combinedly known as hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. So the hormones which are synthesized inside the nuclei are transferred through these tracts to the axonal terminal, and the area where the axonal terminal exists is called infundibular process. This is the infundibulum, this area which attaches the pituitary gland with the hypothalamus is called infundibulum, while this area where the axonal terminal exists is called infundibular process. Now coming toward the detail of posterior pituitary gland. To know about the detail, we should know about some structures. This structure represents the blood vessels in which the blood flow from the inferior hypophyseal artery to the posterior hypophyseal vein with the help of plexus, that is called plexus of infundibular process, or you can say the capillary plexus of infundibular process. This is called the capillary plexus of infundibular process because this is near the infundibular process. This capillary network is near the infundibular process, that is why this is called the capillary plexus of infundibular process. So the hormones are stored inside the neuronal terminal or here inside the vesicles, and upon the stimulation of these vesicles, these hormones are transferred to the capillary plexus. And from the capillary plexus, this hormone is transferred to the target site. We will know about that later. Now coming towards the upper part. This is the supraoptic nucleus. Near the supraoptic nucleus, there is another small nucleus that is called median preoptic nucleus. Above the median free optic nucleus there is a layer, as we know that there is a layer, and above the layer over here there is third ventricle, as we know that the third ventricle is above the hypothalamus. So the third ventricle is having a layer on ventral side. This layer is called lamina terminalis. Now coming toward the detail. So this layer contain two types of collection of cell over here about the median free optic nucleus. This collection of cell contain the osmoreceptor. The cell inside these small organs are called osmoreceptor, and this collection of cell above the median free optic nucleus is called organum vasculosum, and this collection of cell above the median free optic nucleus is called subfornical organ. I'm going to write these terminologies which will help in understanding. LT is for lamina terminalis. The OV is for organum vasculosum, and the SFO is for subfornical organ. So the organum vasculosum and the subfornical organ contain collection of cells, contain large number of cells, and each of these cells are called osmoreceptors. We can also see over here a blood vessel. uh, there is a capillary over here, and this capillary is in contact with this lamina terminalis and these two types of collections of cells. So over here the capillary is normal capillary is not making any blood brain barrier, as so the blood can flow from this capillary to these cells. This blood can bath these group of cells. And what does these group of cell do? When the blood come in contact with these collection of cells, these collection of cells detect the concentration of solute inside these the concentration of solute inside the blood which come from this blood vessel. As the blood brain barrier is broken in this area, because this in this area the capillaries can allow the blood to come in contact with these collection of cells. So when these cells come in contact with the blood and the blood is having low amount of water and high amount of solute, it means that the blood is hyperosmolar. When there is hyperosmolality of the blood, when the concentration of solute is very high and the concentration of water is very low, the shrinkage of these cells occur, and the shrinkage of these cells can activate what the shrinkage of these cells can activate or stimulate the median free optic nucleus, and the median free optic nucleus do what it gives signal to the supraoptic nucleus, and inside you can see that the supraoptic nucleus is in close contact with the median preoptic nucleus. So the supraoptic nucleus is activated or stimulated, or the action potential is generated inside those the cell bodies of the supraoptic nucleus. So it transfers the action potential through the supraoptic hypophyseal tract towards the infundibular process toward the nerve ending. So over here in the nerve ending, the vesicles are there, and those vesicles contain what? Those vesicles contain those vesicles contain the vasopressin, and that vasopressin is secreted to the blood vessel, to the capillary plexus, and from this capillary plexus the blood goes throughout the body and circulate to each and every part of the body. It also come in contact with the kidney. It also goes to the kidney. When this blood reaches the kidney, what does it do? I'm going to show you. It come in contact with the nephron. As we know that this is a nephron, this is the glomerulus, this is the Bowman capsule, and this is the proximal convoluted tubule. This is the descending loop. This is the loop of Henle. This is the ascending loop. This is the distal convoluted tubule, and this is the collecting duct. We will know about the effect of ADH or effect of vasopressin on the collecting duct. So the ADH, which is secreted from the posterior pituitary gland upon the stimulation of the supraoptic nucleus, that ADH come in contact with the collecting duct, and collecting duct contain the special type of cell which are called principal cells. So for example, this is the sagittal plane of the collecting duct, and this sagittal plane of the collecting duct shows that this is a cell on the side of the lumen of the collecting duct. So this principal cell is in contact with the blood vessel. So from the blood vessel, the ADH will be secreted to the interstitial phase. From the interstitial phase, this ADH will, this vasopressin will come in contact with the receptor on this principal cell. This receptor is called vasopressin receptor. When this ADH combine with the vasopressin receptor, it activate this receptor, and the internal domain of this vasopressin receptor goes under conformational changes, and this internal receptor or this internal domain of this receptor will activate an enzyme inside this principal cell. This enzyme is called adenylyl cyclase, and when this adenylyl cyclase is activated, this adenylyl cyclase will convert the ATP inside this principal cell into CAMP. So the activation of this enzyme will lead to the formation of CAMP, cyclic adenosine monophosphate. So this cyclic adenosine monophosphate will activate the protein kinase A. So this protein kinase A will go to the nucleus of this cell. When this protein kinase A reaches inside this nucleus, what it does it do? So when the protein kinase A come inside this nucleus, it will activate the transcription factor, and that transcription factor will activate the DNA, and that DNA will form a messenger RNA, and that messenger RNA will go outside this nucleus. And when this messenger RNA come outside this nucleus, this messenger RNA will form some protein, and those protein will combine together to make some porine, to make some channels, and those channels are called aquaporine 2. And those aquaporine which are synthesized upon the stimulation of this protein kinase A, that aquaporine will be incorporated inside the luminal side of this cell membrane. So in short, the ADH is responsible for the synthesis of special type of channel that is called aquaporine 2, and these channels are incorporated on the spot inside this cell membrane. When these channels are incorporated inside the cell membrane, this allow the flow of water from collecting duct to the principal cell. When this water is transferred to the collecting from the collecting duct to this principal cell, this water is transferred from this principal cell to the interstitial space through another type of aquaporine channel that is called aquaporine 3, aquaporine 4, and this water is transferred from the interstitial space to the blood vessel. And when is transferred toward the blood vessel, the volume of blood is increased, or the volume of water inside the blood is increased, so the osmolarity of the blood is decreased. So this whole mechanism shows that when the concentration of solute inside the blood is increased, or when the osmolarity of the blood is increased, what does happen inside the blood? The ADH is secreted from the posterior pituitary gland, and that ADH is responsible for the compensation of the blood volume, is responsible for the increase of water inside the blood. It increased the water concentration inside the blood. This is called antidiuretic hormone because this is antidiuresis. This is against the diuresis. Diuresis mean urination. Diuresis mean to pee. So when the ADH is secreted, the ADH leads to the decreased volume of urine or decreased volume of water inside the urine which is collected after the high concentration of ADH in the blood. The urine will have low volume of water because a large volume of water will be absorbed through these aquaporine 2 channels. So we should know that the ADH is secreted when the supraoptic nucleus is activated, and the supraoptic nucleus is activated when the osmoreceptor are activated, and the osmoreceptors are activated when there is low blood volume, or when there is low blood pressure, or when there is high concentration of solute inside the blood. Or one other condition is also pain, and when an individual is going through pain, also these osmoreceptors are activated. Now coming towards the oxytocin. To know about the oxytocin, we are going to the next slides. In this slide, we can see this is womb or uterus. I'm going to magnify it. This womb contains the internal layer that is called endometrium, and the second layer that is called myometrium. The myometrium contains muscles. This opening of the womb or this opening of the uterus is called cervix. This cervix contains some receptors which are called stretch receptors. When the fetus become 9 months and it get matured, and this is ready for the birth, so what happens, this fetus apply pressure on the surrounding. This fetus also apply pressure on the cervix. So when this fetus apply pressure on the cervix, what happens, the stretch receptors are activated. And when the stretch receptors are activated, what happens, these stretch receptors are connected with the nervous system. The afferent somatic nerve or the afferent somatic neurons are connected with the stretch receptor of the cervix. So when this fetus apply pressure on the cervix, the stretch receptors are activated, and the stretch receptor give signal or give action potential to the afferent somatic nerve, afferent somatic neuron. So this afferent somatic neuron passes the signal towards the spinal cord, and from spinal cord it goes toward the brain, and from the brain it goes to the respective nucleus inside what, inside the hypothalamus, and this nucleus is called paraventricular nucleus. This nucleus is responsible for the synthesis of what, this is responsible for the synthesis of oxytocin. So this nucleus give the signal towards the axon, and that axon pass the signal or pass the action potential toward the nerve ending over here, and those nerve ending inside the infundibular process produce what, that produce oxytocin, and that produce some vesicle, that have some vesicle, and those vesicles are degranulated, and those vesicles secrete what, those vesicles secrete oxytocin, and that oxytocin is released into the blood. When the oxytocin is released into the blood, what happens, that oxytocin reaches the myometrium, and when it reaches the myometrium, it combined with oxytocin receptor in the myometrium, and when it combined with the oxytocin receptor and the myometrium, it increased the calcium concentration inside the muscle cells of the myometrium. And when the calcium concentration is increased inside the muscle cells of the myometrium, the contraction of the myometrium take place. When the myometrium get contracted, the fetus apply pressure on the cervix get open, and this fetus get out of the uterus. When this fetus get out of the uterus, it goes to the vaginal tube, and through vaginal tube the mother gave birth to the baby. So the oxytocin, which is released from the nerve ending of the posterior pituitary gland, is responsible for the birth process. One thing you should know that this vaginal tube or this vagina also contains some stretch receptors, and these stretch receptors are activated when these stretch receptors come in contact with pressure or come in contact with the sperm. So when these stretch receptors are activated, those afferent somatic nerve get signal towards the paraventricular nucleus, and this paraventricular nucleus when secrete the oxytocin. This oxytocin goes towards the again it goes towards the myometrium, and it start the contraction process of the uterus. Though there is no baby or there is no fetus, still there is contraction process, and that contraction of the uterus is called peristalsis. And that peristaltic moment is provide some significance to the sperm to go upward toward the fallopian tube. So that peristaltic moment provides opportunity for the sperms to go from the cervix, or go from through the uterus to the fallopian tube. And over there in the fallopian tube, the womb is there. It combines with the womb, and fertilization occurs. Now coming towards the next slide. In this slide, we can see that this is female nipple. This nipple contain nerve ending of apparent somatic neurons. So when this nipple is sucked by the baby, what happened? The nerve ending provides signal towards the brain, and in the brain the signal is transferred to the paraventricular nucleus. So the paraventricular nucleus gives signal to the nerve ending over here, and that nerve ending secrete the oxytocin. When oxytocin is released, this oxytocin goes towards the muscles which are inside the mammary gland. These muscles are all around some structures, and these structures are called alveoli, and these alveoli contain milk. The milk secretion or milk production inside these alveoli take place with the help of prolactin and with the help of luteinizing hormone. So what happened when the oxytocin is released toward these muscle are called myoepithelial cells. So these myoepithelial cells get contracted. When these myoepithelial cells get contracted, what happens? The milk is ejected from the areola towards the opening of the breast. So oxytocin is responsible for the ejection of milk from the breasts. The oxytocin is also responsible for the transfer of sperm from the testes to the reproductive tract, or the oxytocin is responsible for the ejection of the sperm. So when the oxytocin is released, this vas difference is contracted, and the contraction of vas difference provides opportunity for the sperm to be ejected from this vas difference toward the reproductive tract. So the oxytocin is responsible for the ejection of sperm during ejaculation.